So if your slope is greater than 1, then it's going to be a steep line. Or steeper, I guess I should say. Well, if slope is less than 1, meaning like a fraction or a decimal, it's going to be a flatter line. Oh, okay. No, I did not know that. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't do it on purpose, I promise. All right. Back to what I was saying here. If your slope is greater than 1, it's going to be a steeper line. If your slope is less than 1, then your line's going to be a little bit flatter. Let's see what this looks like with some of these. So in this case, we have f of x equals 5x, while g of x equals 5 times negative x. So go ahead and write both of those down so that you can have your notes and examples that go along with that. All right. So I want to point out here that the 5 is the same on both of those. The 5 is not considered any sort of transformation because it's the same on both. So you're looking for differences. The difference you should notice is that this one here has that negative x, which is inside the parentheses. Okay? So inside would be horizontal. Do y'all agree? All right, so before we start actually doing that, I'm going to graph my parent function. And I wouldn't mind if y'all did it too. Just remember, a parent function is, well, not that because that's squiggly. There's our parent function is just the most basic. Or this could be even the 5x. It doesn't matter. I'm just graphing. At this point, the 5 truly doesn't matter. All right. Now, what's going to happen is because it is a inside horizontal change, that means our graph is going from basically a positive slope to a negative slope. Yes? Do y'all agree with me? Positive to negative? So what's essentially happening here is this graph is moving this direction. And this piece is going to go this direction. So what's going to end up happening is we're going to have a line that goes this way. So this would be our g of x. So it's like it is a reflection, but we have to know which axis it's reflecting over. Which axis, there you go. So that helped, huh? So which axis is it flipping over? If this is the axis, which way or which axis is that flipping over?
It's flipping over the y-axis.
Very good. So this would be a reflection over the y-axis. I'm not using Desmos in this case because when you use Desmos, it's kind of hard to see what's actually happening. That's why I'm doing it by hand today. Okay. All right, next pair of equations. Now this time when we graph this, I'm going to graph my parent function, which happens to be just the basic run-of-the-mill, not too steep, not too flat, direct variation, passes through the origin, all of those good things, right? So our slope changed from 1 to 2. So this line got more steep. So it got steeper. Let me change colors here. It got steeper. So when I go to graph my new line, it's going to be, I'm being a little bit generous here. It's not that much steeper, but I want you to have the visual. So that's one way you can describe it. You can describe it as being steeper. The other way is whether it's horizontal or vertical, and we're going to talk about stretch and compression. I'm gonna be dramatic here with my hands for a second. So imagine you have like a rubber band or a ring of some sort, right? And I'm holding it on the sides horizontally. And I stretch that rubber band. What happens to the rubber band? It gets what? It gets flatter, right? Like when you stretch it, it gets flatter, so to speak. Okay? So then if I take that rubber band and I squeeze it or I compress it, it's going to get steeper, right? So we're using those words flatter and steeper. So if you envision the rubber band, I pull it, it gets flatter. I push it, it gets steeper horizontally. Now let's talk about vertically. If I take that rubber band and I stretch it, what happens to that rubber band? Using the words, is it going to be steep, considered steep or flat? Steep, right? When I stretch it, it's getting steeper. So then when I compress it, what's going to happen to that rubber band? It's going to get flat. So you got to keep those things in mind. So in this case, the 2 is outside the parentheses. Y'all with me on this? So that means if it's outside, it's vertical. So we're talking up and down. You're multiplying by 2. When you multiply by something, it usually gets you a bigger value, correct? So in this case, we would be stretching it, because stretch would mean bigger, yes? So in this case, we would describe this as a vertical stretch. I know that was a lot. Don't worry, we'll do a few more. This is a vertical stretch. Here's our next pair of equations. I have some up front if you need it, and you can always just stick it in there for now.
Yeah, it's this much, but I'm talking about for now.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to start by graphing my parent function. Yet again, here's x, here's y. It is the most basic equation, most basic graph. There's f of x. Now this one's a little bit different than that first one in the sense that we don't have parentheses around the x. Y'all see that? So because there are no parentheses, that means it's vertical this time. So here's our line, and it's vertical, so it's going to go this direction. So then what axis would it be flipping over? The x-axis. So then that means it'll look similar to the other, but it's flipping this direction. So we would describe this as a reflection. Oops, I almost wrote y. I didn't mean to. I have to tell you, this is one of the most abstract concepts that we're going to be covering. I mean, it's not, you really have to think about the rules and everything because it's not math per se. It's more like vocabulary and descriptions and stuff like that. So we kind of have, I've always had a hard time with these, but it's okay. Here's our next one. Again, we're using that parent function, f of x equals x. I'm not actually going to graph these. I'm just going to describe them. So I'm going to start on the furthest left. So I'm going to look at this negative sign here. It's inside our parentheses, correct? So is that vertical or horizontal? Horizontal. So we're looking at left to right. Yes? Okay. So that means this negative tells us we're reflecting over which axis? If we're moving from left to right, so here's our axis, the graph is going from here to here. Reflection over the y, that's right. All right, now let's look at this 3/4. This is where the tricky part comes in. It's inside, right? Which means it's a horizontal change. Yes, horizontal change. So we're looking at left or right. So we need to decide, is this graph going to be flatter or steeper? Remember, the smaller the slope, the flatter the line. It's going to be flatter, right? So if we're holding that rubber band, think about this, and we want it to be flat, what are we doing? Stretching. So this case, it would be a horizontal stretch. Okay? Right here, that's the technical terms. I'm not going to worry about that. Here's the next one. Away from left to right, so I'm going to start with the 1/3. Very similar to the last one. That line's going to get flatter, right? Because there's less rise, more run. So it's going to be a flatter line, depending on how you're looking at that. So I'm holding it horizontally because it's inside the parentheses, and I want to make it flatter. So what am I doing? Stretching. Which direction? So we describe that as horizontal. So it's a horizontal stretch. Now, the -2 is just like what we did yesterday. Yesterday, we were talking about up, down, left, and right. This is a horizontal shift, left or right. It's opposite of what you think because of the parentheses. You would think you would go left. Right. I'm very animated today, right? I'm using my hands a lot. It's kind of good because my arms are sore. I worked out and did arms. Sorry, just sharing. Is caring? Here is the next one. So let's work our way from left to right, starting with the 2. So the 2 is outside of everything, right? So that means we're talking vertical. So up and down. 2 is going to make that line. Is it going to make that line more steep or more flat? More steep. So that means that line is going this way, which means we're doing what? Stretching. In which direction? How do we describe that? So that would be a vertical. Good. Stretch. Now keep in mind, if that, I'm just using this as an example, if that 2 were negative, it would also include a reflection, okay? But it's not, so we're not going to worry about that. All right. Back to the, now we're almost done. We have the 3, the -3 inside parentheses. It's opposite of what you think. And it's horizontal, right? So which way are we going? Right, 3 units. Good. Okay. Feeling good-ish? Honestly, if you go through the I had over, if you say, is it inside or outside? Okay, horizontal or vertical? If you can get that part, then you can at least narrow it down to 50-50, because then you can decide if it's a stretch or compression. Okay? You have an assignment in Schoology. I'm going to ask you to stay on, maybe do 2 or 3 of the questions, and then log off so that you can make sure you don't need any guidance. So we'll say maybe 5 minutes, and then I'll let you know when that 5 minutes is up. Because I want y'all to be able to reach out to me if you need help. Okay? So go ahead and start that assignment right now.